Hello, everyone, welcome back to the Impact Report. Please subscribe and like my videos. Today, we dive into one of the most explosive developments in Eastern Europe, the deepening crisis in Belarus, where top generals are reportedly challenging President Alexander Lukashenko's long-standing rule. This situation has sent shockwaves through the region, raising questions about the stability of Lukashenko's authoritarian regime and its close ties to Russia. Reports emerging from Minsk suggest growing discontent within the military elite, with senior officers refusing orders and signaling a potential fracture in the power structure that has held Belarus under tight control for over 3 decades. The exterior of the Belarus crisis presents a tense and volatile landscape. From the streets of Minsk to the borders shared with Poland, Lithuania, and Ukraine, the country appears on the brink of significant upheaval. Protests have flared sporadically in recent months, echoing the massive demonstrations of 2020-2021, but now with whispers of military involvement adding fuel to the fire. The Belarusian flag, with its red and green stripes and white ornament pattern, waves over government buildings like the Palace of the Republic, while armored vehicles and security forces patrol key areas. Vast forests and rural landscapes that make up much of Belarus's terrain hide potential partisan activities, and the cold winter weather amplifies the sense of isolation and hardship for ordinary citizens facing economic pressures and political repression. Neighboring Russia's influence looms large, with joint military exercises and deployments visible along the borders, but cracks are showing as Lukashenko's grip weakens. Snow-covered plains and urban squares filled with riot police in dark uniforms create a stark visual of a nation divided, where the historic architecture of Minsk's Independence Avenue stands in contrast to barricades and checkpoints. This external view reveals a country caught between authoritarian continuity and the push for change, with international observers watching closely as sanctions and diplomatic pressures mount. Now, let's go deep into the interior of this crisis, examining the core elements driving the challenge to Lukashenko's rule from within the highest levels of power. The interior dynamics are complex and layered, rooted in decades of centralized control, economic dependency on Russia, and suppressed dissent that has now reportedly reached the armed forces. Alexander Lukashenko, often called Europe's last dictator, has maintained power since 1994 through a combination of repression, electoral manipulation, and strategic alliances. But recent reports indicate that top generals, frustrated with corruption, economic stagnation, and Lukashenko's increasingly erratic decisions amid regional conflicts, are openly defying orders. This internal rift could stem from concerns over Belarus's role in supporting Russia's actions in Ukraine, where Belarusian territory has been used for troop movements and missile launches, placing the military in a precarious position. Inside the Ministry of Defense and military headquarters in Minsk closed, door meetings have allegedly turned heated, with officers questioning loyalty to a leader whose approval ratings have plummeted among the rank and file. The interior also encompasses the human cost. Thousands of political prisoners languish in detention centers, independent media silenced, and civil society crushed. Yet underground networks persist, coordinating with exiled opposition figures to amplify voices of discontent. Economic interiors paint a grim picture. Inflation threats, reliance on Russian subsidies, and sanctions biting into key sectors like potash exports have eroded living standards, fueling resentment even among state loyalists. Within the security apparatus, the KGB, still called by its Soviet-era name, monitors every move, but leaks suggest divisions, with some Siloviki security officials hedging bets on a post-Lukashenko era. Lukashenko's inner circle, once ironclad, shows signs of strain as purges and reshuffles fail to quell doubts. The All-Belarusian People's Assembly, a body Lukashenko created to secure his influence even after potential retirement, now faces scrutiny as a tool for perpetuating power rather than transition. Deep inside rural collectives and urban factories, workers whisper about strikes, recalling the 2020 movement that nearly toppled the regime. Opposition leaders in exile, like Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, maintain contact with insiders, providing moral support and plans for democratic reform. This interior crisis is not just political, it's societal, with youth demographics increasingly alienated and seeking change. Generational shifts in the military, where younger officers trained in post-Soviet realities clash with old Guard loyalists, add another layer. Reports of defections, though unconfirmed in official channels, point to a fracturing loyalty that could cascade if key figures publicly break ranks. The psychological interior of fear, instilled through years of arrests and torture, is beginning to crack under sustained pressure from sanctions, relief negotiations, and international spotlight. Belarus's interior sovereignty concerns, with deepening integration into Russia's union state, have alienated nationalists within the armed forces who prioritize independence. All these elements combine into a pressure cooker, where the challenge from top generals represents not just a power grab, but a potential pivot toward reform or chaos. This big interior view reveals vulnerabilities Lukashenko has long masked: over-reliance on personal rule, lack of institutional checks, and failure to address grievances from the 2020 protests. As generals reportedly demand accountability and new leadership directions, the regime's interior stability hangs by a thread, with implications for regional security and Belarus's future trajectory. On performance, Lukashenko's regime has historically excelled at maintaining control through efficient repression and propaganda, but recent events expose declining effectiveness. The government's performance in handling dissent has been brutal yet increasingly costly, with mass arrests straining resources and international isolation deepening. Military performance remains loyal on the surface, but alleged refusals by generals to deploy against civilians or fully align with Russian demands highlight cracks. Economic performance suffers from sanctions, with GDP stagnation and dependence on Moscow subsidies undermining claims of stability. In contrast, opposition networks perform remarkably in exile, coordinating aid and information flows despite repression. Overall, the regime's performance score is low on legitimacy and sustainability, performing well only in short-term survival tactics. Safety features in this context refer to the regime's mechanisms for protecting power, including a vast security apparatus, propaganda machine, and alliances. Lukashenko has fortified safety through nuclear hosting agreements with Russia and tactical weapon deployments, deterring external intervention. Internal safety relies on Oman riot police and rapid response units, effective at quelling protests, but now facing potential military backlash. Cybersecurity and surveillance provide additional layers, monitoring communications to preempt threats. However, these features have weaknesses, overstretched from ongoing repression and reliance on Russian backing, which could waver if Moscow prioritizes its own interests. Unique selling points of Lukashenko's rule have traditionally been stability, social welfare remnants from Soviet times, and positioning Belarus as a buffer against Western influence. He sells neutrality in regional conflicts while leaning on Russia for support, appealing to conservatives valuing order over democracy. For nationalists, he promotes Slavic unity and resistance to EU pressures. However, these USP are eroding as economic woes and repression outweigh perceived benefits, making the challenge from generals a unique moment where internal actors question the narrative. The price of this crisis is steep, Economically, lost trade from sanctions costs billions, human rights toll includes thousands imprisoned, geopolitically, Belarus pays with reduced sovereignty. For citizens, the price is freedom and prosperity foregone under authoritarianism. In conclusion, the Belarus crisis, marked by top generals challenging Lukashenko, signals a potential turning point. While the regime clings to power through force and alliances, internal fractures suggest change is brewing. The world watches as this Eastern European nation navigates uncertainty, hoping for a peaceful path to democracy and independence. Stay tuned for updates, and remember to subscribe for more global conflict insights.